We are ready to talk Week 10 college football here on Prime Sports Network. Marc Lawrence joining us once again from Playbook Experts YouTube channel and playbooksports.com. How's it going, Mark?
Everything's going great, Greg. I can't believe what you just said. Week 10 in college football. Absolutely incredible.
I mean, the good thing is that at least they've added, most teams now will play 12 games, and then you have you do have at least for another year another year you have a playoff system and bowls. So we still have a couple of months of football. It'll be even better in a couple of years when they expand the playoffs. But yeah, unfortunately, I did so many interviews this week because of the fact that we're getting into the big games. We're getting into like some of the early rivalry games, like Alabama, LSU, and so forth. And then big stories like Brian Harsin being fired from Auburn.
Yep.
So there's just a lot of stuff going on in college football. And then we also have to start taking a look now at the draft. It's serious time to start taking a look at these players that are going to enter the 2023 NFL draft in their final handful of games in college. It's the best way to kind of take a look at them. Because once you get through the season, then it's just off to scouting, all-star games, and things of that nature. And it's okay, but it's not any fun. Not really when you compare it to actual game footage. We take it because it's in March.
It's work is what you're saying, right?
What's that?
It's work is what you're saying, yes.
Yeah, but it's good work. I will admit that. We're not mining coal or anything like that. And it's one of those things where if it's in November, it's like, is this like necessary? But when it's in March or February, it's like you're actually okay about, give me football. All right, give me something that really excites me about football because the season's over anyway. So it is what it is. All right, so by the way, we have our NFL show. We already recorded that. It's on the channel. You can check that out. Ryan Dunleavy was with us this week. So we didn't really go into anything much as far as the Week 9 games in the NFL. It was more of a midterm report and preview for the rest of the season. So we gave our predictions and Super Bowl futures and all that. So you can check that out for any of you NFL fans. We also have a fantasy report that's standalone. We posted that, so you fantasy fans. So that's also available on the channel. This is all college football, even though I did throw in the Minnesota Viking logo on the screen just to keep things kind of status quo. And why not? The Vikings kind of deserve to have their logo represented with the start that they have gotten off to. And we'll talk actually a little bit about the NFL, just a little bit later on, but we're going to stick to college football mostly here. Okay, so the big one, of course, is Tennessee and Georgia. And I had an opportunity to talk to Jed May from UGAsports.com, go over what's going on with the Georgia side of things. The big story is Nolan Smith's injury and how that's going to impact Georgia's defense, because I'm not so sure the line would have changed much, to tell you the truth. Maybe it did. I don't think so. But that's a big advantage for Tennessee. You're just going in to play Georgia, and just when you do, no Nolan Smith, who right now might be their best player.
Yeah, you don't want to have that happen when you get a matchup like this. It's sort of like a Breeders' Cup race, if you will, between two premier college football teams, and you'd love to have both teams healthy and 100% a full deck, if you will, going into the football contest. But remember, there are so many players on this Georgia roster, much like Alabama, that Kirby Smart has recruited, that were number one recruiting classes going back 3 and 4 years. So next man up, if you will, for Georgia, in that
nobody
sense.
feels sorry for the Bulldogs.
No, nobody does. And we always use that analogy. We talk about the quarterback going down, the new one steps in, rally around that. Him being as good as he was, you could end up having somebody rally around this injury here as well.
The big matchup is really, I think, also going to be, can Tennessee's defense hold up? We wondered about that after the Alabama game, because even though they won, the defense really couldn't stop Alabama. And that's why we were still giving Georgia the edge, because Georgia had still a good enough offense, but the superior defense. Since then, Tennessee, all right, FCS, we're not going to count it, but they shut down Kentucky, which was nice. Not that Kentucky's a high-powered offense, but they got a pro prospect at quarterback. That's okay. That's good. At least they shut them down and they did what they had to do. but now again they're making a big step up. I like Tennessee in this spot just because of the fact that, and I've said this for the past week or so, and I said it on some of the other shows, and some of these other analysts have actually agreed with me. There's just something about this Tennessee team this season that you just wonder whether or not this is their year.
Well, it could well, and it appears to be their year. Undefeated right now, number one on top of the college football playoff rankings. Everything has gone Tennessee's way thus far this football season, and good for them. It's been a long time coming, and they're playing really, really good football this year. My concern here, though, is the ranking of Tennessee number one in the college football playoff rankings.
Can they handle that?
Can they handle it? And who did they displace? Number one in the APP poll, AP 25 poll, Georgia. Number one in the coaches poll, Georgia. Knocked down to number three because here comes Tennessee. That might not work so well. I know Kirby Smart's going to use that for sure to get this football program focused here. But the other things that I look at in this game here are two things. Number one, Kirby Smart has never lost a football game against an undefeated opponent. Okay, he's been there 8 times. He's won all 8 football games. The other is whenever you have a defending national champion involved in a football game of undefeated teams, they've won 20 in a row, the defending national champions. Yeah, that goes all the way back to 2012. So if by statistics it says that Georgia should win this game, then you have to put Kirby Smart onto the pedestal and see what Kirby Smart does in games that Georgia wins straight up. And you know something, it's pretty good. So those are my reasons to look at the Georgia Bulldogs here. I think they're a football team right now that feels a little bit Rodney Dangerfield, if you will.
Yeah, now if I'm Heupel, what I'm doing is I'm bringing in my clippings, and all I'm doing is I'm actually printing it out. I don't know if anybody uses the newspaper anymore. I'm printing out the odds on the game. And I'm going, wait a second here. We're an 8-point underdog. Who's talking about us being what? Don't listen to any of that nonsense. They're the 8-point favorite. So you can do that. But look, if Georgia wins, I wonder if Tennessee still has a chance to make the playoffs. I think they might. And I think the only way they can is it's a close game. And look, hey, we had to go to Georgia, defending champs, and we gave them a game, and it was a close game. And, okay, win out. And then, obviously, you have to have Georgia win the SEC championship. And so then Georgia's in. Alabama's got 2 losses.
Yes.
And Tennessee's sitting there going, we deserve a chance. And now you're going, okay, are there 3 teams that can leapfrog Tennessee? Or would they put in over Tennessee?
Well, the first question is clearing up teams from the SEC. If Tennessee does not win the SEC championship, let's say they lose this football game.
They're done.
Yes. Okay, so they've got that loss. And then Georgia and whomever from the West meets for the title, most likely Alabama. So what happens there if, number one is if Georgia loses to Alabama.
Oh, then forget it.
Tennessee's cooked, okay?
Done.
Right, they're cooked, okay? If Georgia wins the football game, then it comes down to whether or not Tennessee should go ahead of Alabama with 2 losses, as you say.
Well, Tennessee beat them.
Yes, Tennessee beat them, and they got 2 losses.
Yeah.
So that's the only way it's going to not happen for Tennessee is that scenario right there. I think it's going to be a very difficult road to hoe for them because you've also got other teams that are also deserving to be in this college football playoff.
Big Ten champ, Ohio State or Michigan, if they go undefeated and whoever wins, they're in.
Does a 1-loss Ohio State team make it?
Over a 1-loss Tennessee? I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. It all depends.
Yeah.
But, again, it depends how the games go. If it's a really good game, if Georgia wins by 17, yeah, Ohio State then. Why not? Put them in if Ohio State loses like a nail-biter to Michigan or something like that. Because, obviously, it has to be the winner of Michigan-Ohio State undefeated, and there's no way either of those teams could then lose the Big Ten championship game. So they'd have to both either one of them would have to go undefeated. But I don't think, because I think what happens is more than likely a 1-loss Ohio State-Michigan team is I just don't see how they even get a chance. I just don't. You know how disrespected the Big Ten is at this point, especially in these big games. So I would seriously doubt it unless they're undefeated.
Well, I think both coaches are probably not even discussing or even
No,
thinking about what we're
we
talking
are.
about.
Yeah, yeah,
Their full focus is right here.
sure, absolutely. Big 12. I mean, at this, I can't imagine any team but TCU. So it's TCU, undefeated. They're in over Tennessee. I don't care if Tennessee's got a loss against Georgia in overtime. If TCU's undefeated, they should go in ahead of Tennessee. I don't know if that would work out, to tell you the truth, but I think, would you agree? Tennessee undefeated, and that's the only, because every other team at the Big 12's got 2 losses, so no other team can get into the championship but TCU.
Well, Tennessee undefeated's in. You know that.
Yes.
That's a given. So who comes from elsewhere?
And by the way, if Georgia loses, it's the same thing.
That's the discussion. If Georgia loses and TCU goes undefeated, okay?
Yeah, that'd be even tougher for TCU. They'd rather have Tennessee lose and go up, put their resume against Tennessee than Georgia.
And I just wonder if the committee wouldn't take a one-loss Georgia team over
they might, yeah.
Over a perfect TCU team, right?
They might. Yeah.
Yes, I think they might. Yes.
Yeah. So, but I don't know if TCU is going to go undefeated. That's just this, as we talked about. Matter of fact, if you look at their schedule, check this schedule out for TCU. Texas is next week on the road. Baylor's on the road after that.
Oh.
And then they host Iowa State. And then they'd have to win the Big 12 championship game. I don't see it. I don't see it.
And hosting Iowa State, while it looks like a win for them, it's not going to be easy. Not with that sticky defense.
Pressure,
Iowa
too.
State.
If they're under pressure to win the game.
Under pressure, exactly. On top of it. The noose,
Yes,
right,
yes.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So that's why there's a chance. And then you got Clemson. Now, Clemson, I don't think they have a chance unless they go undefeated. I just don't. I don't think they played a tough enough schedule. I just...
It wouldn't surprise me if Clemson loses this week at Notre Dame. It really wouldn't.
Yeah, because if we're talking Clemson, Georgia, or Tennessee, they're going to go Georgia, Tennessee. There's no way they're going to Clemson if they all have one loss, or 2 of those teams have one loss.
Yes.
So Clemson needs to go undefeated, which could happen. So let's say Clemson goes undefeated, Big Ten team goes undefeated. That's realistic. That could happen. And then you have the SEC champ. Now it's Georgia or Tennessee with 1 loss, or the 4th team. And that 4th team, again, it's open. That's why I think the loser of this game can definitely end up back in the championship of the playoff system.
It's ironic, Greg. We're talking about all these possibilities, and they're all narrowed down because we've got a 4-team playoff. When they expand, we're not even going to be talking about possibilities.
I know.
We're going to be talking about teams that are like 16th, 18th, 20th, working their way into the top 12.
Yeah.
The Boise States of the world.
What about Oregon? Now, if Oregon runs the table and they have 1 loss, the fact that they lost and got blown out by an SEC team, even if it ends up being Tennessee that they didn't play, they'll hold it against them. And they'll go, no, we're going to take 1 loss Tennessee over 1 loss Oregon.
Or they'll take 1 loss Georgia for sure over 1 loss Oregon because they're the team that blew them out. Right.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I don't think there's any question if they lined up this week, Oregon and Georgia, in a neutral field, that would be a football game. Whatever Oregon did in that first game is just, they're not the same team right now. They're just not. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that Oregon would win. I'm just saying they wouldn't get, because they got destroyed in that first game. They didn't do anything.
They wouldn't lose as bad.
Yeah.
But it would still be, I think, a one-way street. I mean, you still got Georgia, the defending champion, who's knows how to outmuscle that football team. And you'd see a pretty strong line in that football game as well. So if the Pac-12 does make it and Oregon is their representative, they're going to end up being probably a pretty healthy dog in the playoff.
And it might be USC that has the best chance to
USC,
do something.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they'll respect Lincoln Riley. They'll respect the players. They didn't get blown out by Georgia to begin the season. Their only loss was a last-second loss to Utah on the road. They led the entire game. I think if USC would run the table, that would be very interesting to see if, again, I don't think they get past Georgia or Tennessee with one loss, but that I think they would give them a little bit more respect in Oregon.
I agree. We're making cases here for Tennessee, but rightfully so.
Yeah,
because we're talking about the number one team in the country.
And I think what we're saying here is again, I think there's a legitimate chance that the loser of this game could still end up in the playoffs. Okay, so now points-wise, I really like Tennessee. I did not go with the money line. I'll sprinkle some money on the money line, but we proposed taking Tennessee a few weeks ago at 100-1, so we certainly hope people did that. But if you didn't, and they lose on Saturday, I want to see what the number is. What do you think would happen to that number? They're 8-1 to win the championship now. If Tennessee loses to Georgia, what do you think their championship number would be?
What Tennessee's number would be? 20-1.
I agree. And in that point, if you hadn't taken them yet, I would take them. I'd take them at 20-1.
That would probably be the better buy.
Yep. All right. Also in the SEC, you have the Alabama LSU game. And what a back-to-back, huh? Alabama LSU at nighttime at Baton Rouge, right after you get to watch the Georgia Tennessee game. So it's a great, and I'm glad LSU is playing as good as we thought they could when the season began. We talked about them as a nice sleeper. And by the way, if you didn't get an opportunity to view all of our preseason prediction shows on every conference, shame on you, because we did a really good job on sleepers. And this was one of them, LSU, that Brian Kelly knows what he's doing. He has the talent. He could turn this thing around. It's not a full turnaround yet this season because they'd have to beat Alabama in order for that to happen. But the interesting thing about this game that I'm not so sure people are really zeroing in on, because of the fact that I know they're just thinking, Alabama, I'm sure they'll win. They usually do beat even LSU when LSU is, unless they have Joe Burrow on the team, is the fact that right now, if LSU pulls the upset, they're in the driver's seat to win the West.
How would that be?
Well, because because right now that Alabama would have 2 losses in the conference and LSU just has 1.
Wow. Yeah, that would be pretty sweet. And I'm sure that's another stat that Chip Kelly's probably going to be talking to his players about, knowing that, hey, we're going to assume the pole position here, guys, with this win. Could be the biggest game of your football lives. And I'm sure Chip Kelly knows how to get his football. Or Brian Kelly, I'm sorry. He knows how to get his football players up for games like this. But that's certainly a motivational tool.
And next week, if Alabama beats LSU, and if Mississippi wins their game this week, next week, Alabama, Mississippi, basically for the West title. Because Ole Miss only has 1 loss in the conference. Because right now it's Alabama, Ole Miss, and LSU with 1 loss. So that and Ole Miss is taking on, who is Ole Miss taking on this week? Mississippi. Who are they taking on? Are they playing this week? Why don't I have Ole Miss here? Very strange. By the way, I'm going to have a guest next week. I already lined this up. Good for me. McCready, who was one of the analysts for Mississippi. I had him on to talk Mississippi football before the season began, and I looked ahead and said, you know what, this could be interesting if they match up. And by the way, they are off. They have a bye, so they're going to be waiting for Alabama.
Lane Kiffin schedules a bye before Alabama.
Yeah.
Shock. Yeah. I'm sorry.
And so that interview was on Tuesday. So if Alabama wins, I'll have a big interview set up on Tuesday with the one of the top analysts that cover Ole Miss football to preview that Ole Miss Alabama game. So There's still a lot going on in the SEC, with Tennessee, Georgia, and then the next 2 weeks with Alabama's games. And if LSU, I didn't even look at LSU's schedule, but if LSU winds up pulling the stunner and upsetting Alabama, and they're in the driver's seat. Let's keep in mind, though, that even though I say they're in the driver's seat, that's only if. Well, actually, they already beat Ole Miss, so they are in the driver's seat. But they'd have to win, of course, the rest of their games. So how about that? If LSU does beat Alabama, they'd have wins over Ole Miss and Alabama, and then they'd have to take care of business in 2 remaining SEC games, and they would both be on the road. They have to go to Arkansas, which is not going to be easy with KJ Jefferson healthy, and the final game of the season is at Texas A&M, which might be easy the way they're going.
Well, the way they're going, but when they could play a spoiler, I'm sure. Right. I'm sure that would be the role that they would endear themselves to. I don't see LSU losing this game, Greg, if for no other reason. The point spread tells us as much, but if you look at Brian Kelly's body of work, his MO, he's been a double-digit dog 19 times in his career. He's only won 3 of those games. He's only pulled the surprise 3 times.
How about the spread?
This would be a huge surprise there, obviously, if they were to upend Alabama. Both teams benefit from rest in this football game, which is kind of evens each other out in that particular sense here. But I would be really stunned. I would really be stunned if Alabama doesn't win this football game and go on. You've got Nick Saban got this game. They got Mississippi next. You got a tough road to hoe here, does Alabama. But having a week to get ready to do all that is exactly what Nick Saban was looking for.
Yeah, I agree. I like LSU a lot as far as the number. I think they're going to keep it close. They did it last year, and they were not a very good team last year. So that's the kind of rivalry this is. So I can see this as a close game. And just keep in mind, though, that the last 3 times Alabama has played at LSU, they've won by a 94-17 margin with 2 shutouts.
Ooh, wow.
So Alabama doesn't mind going on the road in this rivalry. All right, so that's what's going on in the SEC. A couple other interesting games. Liberty, Arkansas. That's a nice game. Arkansas gets a win. They're going to a bowl. I think Liberty can keep that close. It's a 14-point spread, and Hugh Freeze, he could do a good job keeping that close. And they're coming off that huge win a couple of weeks ago against BYU.
I think what else works in the game, Greg, is a couple of things. Number one, Hugh Freeze is rumored to be in the running for the Auburn game or Auburn.
Oh yeah.
And a win here would be a huge notch in that particular belt. A huge notch. The other is Arkansas is not anywhere near the football team they were proposed or projected to be, and it's because their defense has really fallen off the map. They're allowing over 430 yards a game, and they're in the middle of a pretty strong Southeast Conference sandwich here. I think this is a great spot for Liberty to be in.
A couple of interesting trends. Florida 0-11 against the spread when they take on an opponent following a loss. 0-2 this year in that spot. By the way, Florida needs 2 wins for bowl eligibility, and 3 of their last 4 games are on the road. Missouri just became a 1-point favorite. Why does that matter? Because they've dropped 9 straight covers as a favorite off an upset win, which they upset South Carolina last week. So keep that in mind. And the other game in the SEC we'll talk about in a little bit for a specific reason. Let's talk Big Ten football. Ohio State should have no problem with Northwestern. Michigan should have no problem with Rutgers. So no drama in the Big Ten with those 2 teams. And to tell you the truth, I don't really like many of the games this week. The only game I decided to go with was Illinois. Not just because they're red hot. And by the way, it's another sleeper team that we talked about in our preseason show. But because of Michigan State's turmoil week they're having. Things are not going well this week for Michigan State. They had they have like up to 7-8 players suspended from the fracas and after the game against Michigan in the tunnel. You've got players that they got a receiver that's decided I'm transferring. They had a recruit say I'm not going there. This is a lot of stuff not happening really well at Michigan State. And if you're wondering and maybe why the point spread is so high, that's why. And I think after a rivalry game letdown as well, the way Illinois is going, I think Illinois is the play, even though there's a lot of points.
I think Illinois is the right side of this football game, too, and you can't argue with their numbers. I mean, incredibly, one of only 3 teams in college football this year that has outgained every opponent they played. That's a really, really nice.
That would be a good trivia question.
Yes, it would be. It certainly would be. This hellacious defense they play, number one ranked overall. That's pretty strong as well. Again, what you mentioned, not only with Michigan State having a real choppy year to begin with, now all this off the field annex that is certainly going to help their situation here. I'd be surprised if Illinois does not win this football game comfortably.
The only thing I'm a little bit worried about is the super trend that goes against them. Illinois is 1-13 against the spread at home versus opponent off a straight up ATS loss. That's 1-13. They're 0-1 in that spot this year. And I always have to mention that because sometimes you think, yeah, well, that was then, this is now, but they're 0-1 in that spot this year. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. But other than that, if they get off to a good start in the game, I would expect a blowout. And then you got the other games, which are important. You got the Maryland-Wisconsin game. You know, Maryland already has 6 wins, but more importantly for Wisconsin, they don't have a chance to get into the race or anything like that. But they're 4-4, so they're also looking for bowl eligibility because they have Iowa on the road, they got Minnesota at home. So this is a big game for Wisconsin and for Maryland, of course. Maryland has had a nice season so far.
Yeah, this Maryland football team has been a real surprise, to say the least. You mentioned they're bowl eligible right now coming into the game, playing really, really well. They won the yards convincingly in their last 4 football games. They've dominated the turnover margin, 8-to-1 ratio has Maryland. So they're playing some really, really solid football right now. Much, much bigger need, as you say, also that to the Wisconsin Badger in this football game here. They cannot let this game get away from them. They can't lose to a Maryland football team and expect to win out to go bowling here. So I'm going to look for this big effort by Wisconsin with their interim coach to get the job done here and see if they can't halt this Maryland win scheme.
By the way, and I just mentioned the trend, and I just said how you can't always take a look at a trend. Sometimes you have to take a look if there's something new going on that season. Well, Maryland, going into last week's game, they were 0-10 straight up and against the spread following a win after Game 7 the last 9 years. But last week, they beat Northwestern, but they didn't cover the spread. So they're still 0-11 against the spread following a win after Game 7 the last 9 years. Keep that in mind. Because, of course, they beat Northwestern last week as they take on Wisconsin this week. We'll see if that holds up. Iowa's at Purdue, and that is a really big game for Purdue. Reason being, if Purdue wins the football game, they will remain 1 game ahead of Illinois. 1 game behind Illinois. And then they travel to Illinois next week. So all of a sudden, everybody's jumping all over Illinois, rightly so. But if Purdue wins this week and then beats Illinois next week at Illinois, Purdue is the leader in the West.
So. Yeah, that would be kind of strange to say the least. Makes one wonder, though, are they looking ahead here, Greg? If they are, they'll pay the price. This is an Iowa football team that's dominated them in the past. Very rarely the underdog in this football game. And if you looked last week, you saw Iowa may have come out of their coma when they actually scored a touchdown in each of the 4 quarters of that football game.
Yeah.
First time this year.
Yeah.
So, who knows what's happening here, but it's sort of hard for me to fade that history, also knowing that Iowa has the revenge in this game.
Well, recent years, though, Purdue has actually done just the last few years, they've done a lot better against Iowa. Of course, you go over 20 years, 25 years, you know how much.
Kirk Ferentz years, right.
The thing I am a little bit concerned with, though, too, is I do prefer to take Purdue when they're a dog.
Yes.
They just seem to be a little bit better when they're in the dog role. All right, now let's keep an eye on the Nebraska quarterback in case you're interested. That game is that the line keeps going up, and that's because the Nebraska quarterback may not play. So keep an eye on that. All right, ACC, and look, it's Clemson, Notre Dame. It's the big one, even though Notre Dame's not in the ACC in football. To me, this is just like the Florida State game, Mark. Remember we talked about Clemson as a 3.5 point favorite in that game, and I was like,
yes.
How can they be how is that even possible? Okay, I jumped all over Clemson. By game time, the spread went up to like 6. It's still 3.5, but I'm doing it again. I don't care what Clemson did to Syracuse. That happens. We always say undefeated teams are really good teams. They always have that close game. I don't care about that. Notre Dame hasn't really stepped up. and won a game against a really good team yet this season. We know what Clemson can do. I have to jump all over Clemson in this spot.
Well, I might, if I was Syracuse, I might say maybe that might be true because Notre Dame did knock Syracuse off.
Yeah.
A pretty good football team on a pretty good roll.
That was after the hangover, though.
Yes, it was after there was the bubble burst
Yeah.
spot for them. But what you have in Notre Dame here is a team that they've got 3 losses in the season here. They're not going anywhere other than a decent sized bowl because of their name. But what I like here is this: you got a pretty strong double revenge angle here for Notre Dame. In 2020, the year of the COVID, Notre Dame was playing in the ACC, and they played in the ACC championship game, and they lost to Clemson.
Yeah, they had beaten them in the regular season, and
Yes.
they lost the playoff game.
And lost in the championship game. The year before, they had lost to Clemson in the playoff, the college football playoff. So now you have a Notre Dame football team with 2 pretty big chips of revenge in their shoulder. And while Kelly's no longer here, their current head coach was with this football program, and he's the one that brought all these players into the program. He's the master recruiter. So every player on this team was also a member of each of those 2 losses here. I think this is where Clemson gets tripped up. I've been on there most of the season here all year long, but right now you're going to be on NBC TV, national television, 7:30 Eastern football start here. And here's Clemson, who snuck into the number 4 spot in the college football playoff ranking. And I say snuck into because the committee really, they really, I think, diminished Michigan a little bit because of their soft schedule, if for no other reason. And Clemson was the benefactor of that. I think this is Notre Dame's football game of the year, personally.
Yeah.
I know they got Southern Cal their last game of the season, but
I talked to Kyle Kelly on Monday, and we have that interview on the channel, and I kept bringing up USC too, and it was almost like, oh yeah, you're right, USC. It's like no, this is the game. This is the one they're really after.
Exactly. Yep. The undefeated ranked team is what they're after here. So I think the magic of touchdown Jesus works in this game for the Irish.
Clemson, meanwhile, their schedule, this is it for the road games. No more road games for Clemson.
Wow.
So they finish up, and the 3 remaining games are not pushovers. It's Louisville, Miami, and South Carolina. So they should win all those games. But, they did struggle with Syracuse. So anything's possible.
Double-digit favorites in all those games.
Yep,
right.
Yep.
Right.
Also in the ACC, speaking of Louisville, I was a little bit surprised, which is why I went with Louisville, that they were only a 7-point favorite in this spot. They've won 3 straight games. They've played their best football of the year over the last 3 games. They've won the last 3 games by 19.3 points per game. Yes, I'm a little bit concerned with the look ahead because they are going to play Clemson next week. So I get that on the road. But we are, and look, James Madison, nice team. We talked about how nice they were when this early in the season, but now they've dropped a couple of games. So I just think this is the perfect time to just ride Louisville the way they're playing.
Well, I'm going to be on the other side of this football game, and I think James Madison has the ability to win this game. One, it's a huge, bad sandwich for Louisville in this football contest here. They appear to have gotten their act back together, but they've been probably the most inconsistent football team in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's probably all Scott Satterfield's personality.
Because they lose games like this.
Yes, exactly. James Madison was perfect on the season. They lost their first game. We went against them the next game in that bubble burst roll, of which they got blown out at home against Marshall as a 10-point favorite. Why did they get blown out against Marshall as a 10-point favorite? The bubble burst won, but their quarterback was gone. He didn't even dress for the game. Okay, he was a game time decision. He didn't play. This kid he's on the Davy O'Brien Award list this year. That's how good this kid is. It's Centennial. I'm not quite
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he used to play. It was either Colorado State or Hawaii or something like that.
Right. So now he sits out that football game. Obviously, he meant everything to the team. Now he's got a week of rest on top of it to get ready for this game here. This is the spot where I think Louisville trips up, and I think James Madison rewrites the ship here after 2 losses in a row. James Madison could well end up being, if they win this game, a two-loss team for this season. They had an incredible start to their careers, and I think it gets in this game. I like the Dukes in the upset here.
Yeah, Louisville better watch out because they lose this game. All
Yeah.
of a sudden, you're looking at 5-5.
Yep.
Because they got to go to Clemson next week. Also, by the way, I like Wake Forest rebounding this week because last week I think it was that, and as a matter of fact, I did interview Connor O'Neill, who writes for the Deacons Illustrated, because I wanted to get his take on Sam Hartman, and I did mention it, and when I mentioned it, he really kind of agreed with me because he didn't think of it, which was the loss by Syracuse, the win by Clemson pretty much ended Wake Forest season. Because that was it. They had no chance to catch up to Clemson. It was, and that had to really hurt them psychologically going into the game against Louisville. And what happened? They had like 6 turnovers. It was the worst game of the year. And Connor said that the players had actually been like in the living rooms together, watching the game against Clemson and Syracuse. That's how really invested they were and knowing how important it was. So my point is now that game's over with, I think they get back on the track this week against North Carolina State, who barely beat Virginia Tech because Leary's not there anymore. So I like Wake in that spot. And North Carolina State has dropped 5 straight covers as well on the season. And speaking of dropping covers, Miami 0-7 against the spread on the season. And I'm just going to ride Florida State that they're going to make it 0-8. Because even though Miami won that game against Virginia last week, that was terrible. Those 2 teams couldn't score, and then they went to overtime, and they had to go to the 4th overtime 2 safety rule because all they were doing were kicking field goals.
You don't like watching football teams pound it out at each other like that? That's the most ridiculous overtime rule that they could have ever devised.
Oh,
to run 2-point plays consecutively
I hate that.
until somebody fails. Right.
And it's good. It's sometimes it's good and sometimes it's terrible in your point spread situation.
Yeah, on top of it.
On top of
exactly.
it, yeah, because you're going, oh, now I got no chance. It's over. Yep. Or you're like, all right, it's over. Even if I lose, I already covered. That kind of thing.
Well, in the football game, I've been telling you that I don't think Tyler Van Dyke is he's healthy. He's not.
No, I agree. I don't think he's going to play.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, what I saw, I didn't even think he was even close to a National Football League quarterback. Now, that might be because he was not healthy, okay? Because he looked pretty good last year. So they handed the ball over to Jake Garcia. Garcia was as highly recruited a quarterback as there was in the country, okay? And he finally got his chance. Yep. And what did he do? He led him to that slug-out overtime, boring football win, okay? But he got the win. He got the job done. So I'm trying to get a read down here as to who it's going to be in the contest, whether it's Garcia or Van Dyke coming back here.
Garcia is looking like Garcia.
It's looking like Garcia. I think so, too. And I think also that Mario Cristobal is deeply disappointed in Van Dyke. He's not his quarterback here, obviously, because he come over from Oregon, so he inherited him. And he does know how highly touted Jake Garcia is. So I think he's going to give Garcia one more spin at it here this week, and he can play the injury card and say that Van Dyke just wasn't ready for this game. Yeah,
I mean, look, but the other thing is that even with Van Dyke, they haven't covered a game all year. So, that's the thing. We'll find out. Just taking a look to see if there's even any updates on Van Dyke myself. And I did speak with Gary Furman this week on the Miami Hurricanes. So that's available. And they're just saying they don't know. So it's so hard to figure out in college football unless there's a definite yes or no. Because there's even games. That Utah game last Thursday, people turned it on, and it was like, where's Cameron Rising? Why isn't he playing? There was actually no word at all that Cameron had anything wrong with him. And the backup played the whole game, the redshirt freshman. So you just don't know in college football if these players are going to play or not. And, hey, if the coach can do it, which they can, you might as well. All right. By the way, North Carolina is at Virginia. I mentioned that just because they are the leaders, North Carolina, as far as the division in the ACC, the Coastal, 2 games in front of Miami and Duke. Okay. In the Big 12, good games in the Big 12, and the TCU, the undefeated Horned Frogs, are an 8.5-point favorite over Texas Tech. Mentioned their schedule is really tough coming up. This was a tough one for me just because of the fact that I just wonder whether or not TCU is going to just have a game that they're going to let down, and they're not, fires aren't going to be all firing and all that kind of stuff. And Texas Tech is a pretty interesting dog. They've kind of surprised some people this year, and this was another sleeper team that we said to keep an eye on, and they've definitely had that kind of a season. They haven't had that win though, so maybe this is something that they can hold their hat on. We'll see. Yep. But I'm just staying away from it because TCU is clearly the better team, and 8 points is not a lot of points to give up at home.
Well, TCU has been very fortuitous this year. The football games that they've won, they've been in some very sticky wickets in those football games, but somehow late managed to pull away.
They had that late cover last week.
Exactly. I mean, a flukiest of all fluky covers. But they got it. Give them their credit. They did. This Texas Tech football team is the kind of team that I like. Nitty-gritty. They're sitting here on the bowl cusp. They need this win. They've only been outgained one time in their 8 games this year. That means they're in the game every game they play in a contest like this. TCU has Texas up next.
Oh, by the way, Texas Tech beat earlier this year in overtime.
Yes, there you go. That's a really, really big bullet in the holster, if you will.
Yeah, it is.
For this football team. So I think this game has got upset potential written all over it, and I think Texas Tech is a nice live dog in this game.
Baylor, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a 3.5-point favorite. Speaking of tough schedules, Baylor, they take on Kansas State at home next week, TCU at home the week after that, and then at Texas in the last game of the season. That's murderer's row in the Big 12. I just think Baylor's better than Oklahoma, though. Oklahoma's a 3.5-point favorite in this one. I think Baylor might be getting ready for the run and for this big gauntlet of games they're playing, and I'm going to go ahead and take Baylor in this one.
I'm with you. The Baylor Bears playing really good football now, as good as they did last year. They started out a little bit slow, largely because they were the targeted team in the conference from winning that championship last year. They got past that right now, and I think they're hitting on all cylinders coming into this football game. Oklahoma is a team that you don't know what you're going to get. If they do win football games, it's not impressive. I mean, they had the one big win, but other than that, they're sort of scrapping and clawing in every football game they played. I love the stat we put in the Playbook newsletter this week about the Baylor Bear. When they have a conference dog and their opponents up a straight up win and cover, they are 20-1 against the spread. That's a pretty strong role for a good live dog that can come in here and play to win the football game. I'm with you. I'm on the Baylor in this game as well.
And by the way, it's 16-0, and you got this. I got this from the magazine. Of course, you got it from your database and the newsletter. This from the magazine. They've covered 16 straight if they're a conference dog of 4 or more in the same spot, and they're a 3.5-point dog. So if that line does go to 4, but even if it doesn't, you have a good one right there, very good one. And remember, we said this a couple weeks ago. This is still a wide open race for that second spot. TCU looks like they're in pretty good position right now, even though they have to keep winning. Because if they lose to Texas Tech with the tough teams they have coming up, they may not even have a cinch to be in the Big 12 championship game. Because you've got Baylor with 2 losses, Kansas State with 1 loss, Oklahoma State and Texas with 2 losses. All of those teams are capable of making a run and getting to the Big 12 championship game.
If Oklahoma doesn't get out early to a lead in this football game, which they should not, look at what they've done this year, Oklahoma. In the first quarter, they've averaged 0.9 of a point. Not even a point.
What?
Oklahoma is averaging 0.9 points in the first quarter of their football games this year.
So they've been shut out in the first quarter of like almost every one of their games.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes, it is.
For the Oklahoma Sooners.
The Oklahoma Sooners.
Wow.
That ranks 117th in the country, by the way.
There's worse than that. Must be like Rutgers and Iowa.
Well, because those other teams have averaged 0.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oklahoma State, Kansas. That's a good one. Kansas is not going to win a Big 12 this year, but Oklahoma State still has a shot. Now, last week, the injury definitely caught up to Sanders. I don't think there's any question about that. So the question is will he play this week? Are they going to throw him out there again? But I'm just going to take Kansas because even though they lost their first cover last time a couple weeks ago before the bye, let's remember Lance Leipold is 26-9 against the spread at home as an FBS head coach, 3-0 this year at Kansas. So I'm gonna ride that until the burst bubbles.
Well, I don't blame you. I mean, that's all what coaching is all about, and that's why this football program is amongst the most improved in the country thus far this football season. My biggest concern is whether or not Kansas has this look of Syracuse about them right now. The team that started so strong, made so much noise, turned their whole program around in 1 year, then took a loss or two, and they start backing themselves into a bowl situation here. And I'm just wondering if that might not. I'm sorry?
They need one more win.
Yeah, they do.
It ain't going to be easy because it's next week they're at Texas Tech. Then it's Texas at home at Kansas State. So this is as good as a chance as they're going to have.
Yeah, it probably is. And if Sanders doesn't play, I'm sure this will be the best chance they'll have. Yeah, exactly. So I'm staying out of the game.
Yeah. And then the other game in the conference, which I think is the biggest game, of course, is the game at night, Texas at Kansas State. And Will Howard had the game of his life last week in their blowout win against Oklahoma State. And they're even wondering whether or not he's going to start, even though Adrian Martinez is practicing and healthy. That ain't going to happen. Adrian Martinez, if he's practicing and healthy, just like they say he is, he's got to start this week.
Absolutely.
Against Texas. K-State 9-4 in their last 13 as a home dog. Texas has won 5 straight against Kansas State over the last 5 seasons. So this is how Kansas State can turn the table. And by the way, another sleeper of ours, Kansas State, to go. And I said to go to the Big 12 championship. He said to win the Big 12 championship. If that's going to happen, I think they got to win this game on Saturday night.
Well, they have to win this game, and I think they can win this football game. One, Martinez would be a big, huge emotional boost for this football program. Coming into this football game now off that 48-0 blowout over Oklahoma State, that's a lot of big confidence building type of a win, if you will, for this team. I still think what sits in my craw the most is I think the hardest loss that I've taken this year was when Kansas State took this nice, huge lead against TCU and then melted down.
Well, all their quarterbacks got hurt.
Yeah, when Howard, Martinez melted down. And you know what the funny thing is, Greg, and I may have said this before, stop me if I haven't, but going into that game, they were the only team in the country that did not throw an interception.
Oh.
So what happened? They have to go to their third-string quarterback first play.
He ruined it.
Pick six. Yeah. Thank you.
That could be a rematch of the championship game in the Big 12.
It might be. Yep. It might be.
And by the way, if Kansas State wins, Texas is done because that would be 3 losses in the Big 12 for Texas. So I thought they were going to be a playoff contender this year. Wasn't that what everybody said?
Well, that's everybody projected, but I'm not a big Steve Sarkisian fan by any means.
Pac-12, big game tonight, Oregon State and Washington. Oregon State's won 3 straight. Washington has dropped 4 straight covers. Washington at Oregon next week. But it's going to be hard for Washington to get into the Pac-12 race when you've got Oregon, Utah, UCLA, and USC all there. I'm staying away from this game because I don't know about this spot for Oregon State being on the road and all. But could be a good game tonight.
Well, Oregon State's kind of dominated this team, at least to the spread, 15-4, I should say, the last 19 games. And they also bring the better offense and the better defense into this contest. I love that with dogs. They're taking points that can play competitively. Washington's doing this backward slide right now. They started out so good, so strong, so promising, and suddenly they're becoming just a mediocre type team. If they don't win this football game, we'll stamp them as mediocre. They have the potential. They do. There's no question about it. But until they prove it, I got to take the points with Oregon State.
Oregon, of course, we talked about them before. Their last 3 games of the season, after blowing out Colorado this week, Washington at home, Utah at home, at Oregon State. And we said this a couple weeks ago, and I think you agreed. I can't see Oregon running the table. They're going to stump their toes somewhere along the line there.
No, but they're playing Colorado, so that's
Yeah,
not going
this
to
week is
happen.
not going to happen. No.
No, they won't even feel a hangnail
No.
in this particular football game.
Nope.
So all that's going to matter here, obviously, is what's up next behind this. So can they play down to the level of Colorado?
No.
Yeah, most probably. Most probably they can, but they'll maybe still cover the spread.
That's true. UCLA is at Arizona State, and USC hosts Cal. So that UCLA game would be the toughest out of the top grouping in the Pac-12 because Arizona State has actually won 2 of the last 3, including an upset win over Washington at home. So, and by the way, the dog in the UCLA-Arizona State series has won 3 out of 4 and covered all 4. UCLA is up by 4 as far as the spread. A good rebound by UCLA, by the way, after the loss to Oregon to blow out Stanford last week. But this game could be tricky.
It could be. This could be a tricky spot for UCLA, but I've got Arizona State doing a backflip here and going backwards right now. And, they were supposed to be kind of like half-ass sneaky good this football season here. But they just beat a 1-7 Colorado football team. I don't know if that really adds anything to their credibility per se, if you will. I'm going to stay out of the game completely because I'm not quite sure exactly where UCLA is going, but I do know that Arizona State is going backwards at the moment.
Now we go to the group of 5 and the AAC. There's a couple of key games. Central Florida had a huge win against Cincinnati last week. So now you have only one remaining undefeated team in the AAC, and that is Tulane at 4-0 in the division, in the conference. And they're a 7.5-point favorite at Tulsa, and I really like Tulane in this spot. Here's one of the trends from the magazine, the Playbook magazine. 18-2 against the spread as a favorite of less than 11 off a double-digit ATS win. Tulane is 1-0 in that spot already this year. Tulsa, 1-4 last 5 straight up, 0-4 against the spread last 4. The only wins this year, Temple, Northern Illinois, and FCS team. It's not been a good year for Tulsa, so I think Tulane exacts revenge because they've lost the last 2 years to Tulsa and keeps the train rolling there as a 7-point favorite.
Well, what you've got here is a little bit of quirky series history that kind of works against Tulane in the series, if you will. The Hurricanes been favored in 14 of the last 17 games at home in the series. But you've also got a much different Tulane football team this year and a Tulsa football team that's not even close to where they used to be. And they're also the only group of 5 team that's in the college football playoff ranking. So they're feeling awfully good about themselves. They're chirping to the point where they feel that they were dissed and they should have been ranked higher.
I don't even know why anybody says that. I just, and it just came out the rankings. It all takes care of itself, I mean, even the teams that say, well, I'm 6th in the rankings, there's like 5 weeks left in the season. What do you care? Win out. You win out, you're going to be in the playoffs. What the hell are you worried about?
Let your play on the field speak for you. You don't need to get cocky all of a sudden when you're a new kid on the block like that. So, I'm just a little bit concerned about that arrogance, that portion, that part of it here. So the football game. So I'm going to stay out of the game.
Yeah, it's probably that Cincinnati. It rubbed off on them.
It might well have.
Central Florida's at Memphis, so that's a key game for Central Florida. Obviously, they're Houston, Cincinnati, Central Florida all have 1 loss, right behind Tulane. Houston's at SMU. That's a big game for Houston because they're still in the running as well. East Carolina's got the week off. They have 2 losses, but don't rule them out if they run the table because a 2-loss team could end up in the championship game. And East Carolina's playing their best football of the year. They had a big win that win last week over BYU. That was a big win.
Well, I'm a little bit concerned about Cincinnati this week, Greg, inside that conference. They had that 19-game conference win streak snapped last week by UCF. And now they're going to play Navy. And the military teams have just been absolute gold when taking 20 or more points in a football game. Just gold.
Okay.
Which is reason enough for me to get to the middies in this particular contest because what I would call a snapped win streak for Cincinnati in the game. I'm going to take the points at Navy here. I think you're going to get the best out of the middies here and perhaps a little bit of a flat letdown for Cincinnati.
A couple of other notes. Memphis 0-3 the last 3 games, but by a total of 13 points. They've really been close in those losses, and they've covered 8 straight as a home dog of more than 3 points. And they're a 3.5-point dog right now to Central Florida, so keep that in mind as well. And the host in the Houston SMU series has covered the last 5. That's at SMU. Let's move on to the Mountain West. Boise State is looking really good at this point after a sluggish start to the season. So they're not playing a conference game, though, but they're taking on BYU. And, I didn't know what to make of this. I can understand completely why maybe I should take Boise, because they're the hot team now. They've won 4 straight up and against the spread by a total of 86 points. BYU, they've lost 4 straight, and they've lost 7 straight covers. So not a lot going well at BYU right now. But I actually decided to throw BYU a money line play, a single-digit money line play, because it's 250, and I'm just thinking maybe one of these weeks they'll figure it out again, because it's just amazing with all the experience and with the quarterback that they have fallen like this. It's just amazing.
What is amazing, we had lauded BYU at the beginning of the season for all the experience he had coming back, got off to a decent start, but then really, really hit the wall. And now you have a matchup of 2 teams kind of going in opposite directions here. Boise State, you couldn't give them away at the end of September here. There was talk about, is it Andy Avalos, their head coach, maybe looking for another job. That's how poorly things were going at Boise State. Well, they've completely reversed all that right now. And what's the money line price? Is it 250? Yeah, well, if they'd have played this game a month ago, the money line price might have been closer to even. Okay, so I think there is value to Brigham Young in this football contest here. And also, for those of you who do like our Playbook Football newsletter, I write a weekly column I titled it Bet You Didn't Know. And inside the Bet You Didn't Know column this week is an article about what we call it uptight, everything is all right. And it comes really strong to Brigham Young in this football game. So, check that out. It's a 24-8 angle inside of it that comes to BYU in the game.
All right, so check that out. Get the newsletter. We have the link in the video on the description area of how you can do that at playbooksports.com. So right now in the West, Fresno and San Jose State are tied. Fresno beat San Jose State. And the reason Fresno's back in control is the miraculous. Remember, I just talked about Cameron Rising going down and the whole injury quarterback thing? We had no idea. There was still no idea when Jake Haener was coming back. And lo and behold, he steps on the football field last week against San Diego State. He's back. So he comes back, and you figure, oh, okay, now he's back. Well, definitely going to beat San Diego State, right? Well, they were down 2 scores with 3 minutes left in the game and came back to win the game after an onside kick that gave them the ball back. And it was right after they got the ball back on the onside kick. One pass was like 15 yards. The guy missed the tackle, ran the other 20 yards for a touchdown. And Fresno State took the lead. First play, I think, San Diego State got the ball, interception, game over. That's how quickly it went for San Diego State when they had a 2-score lead with like 3 minutes left. So the Jake Haener magic is back in one game, but they have to hold on. And look, I've been riding this Hawaii team the last 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm going to keep riding them because they're getting 27 in the game. They've covered 4 straight games, and the 3 losses out of the 4, because they won 1, have been by a total of 13 points. So why not take them at 27? It's a lot of points. San Jose State, meanwhile, is a heavy favorite against Colorado State. So I doubt Fresno and San Jose State are going to lose this week.
Hawaii might be one of these teams that might be in the ATS top 10 this season, a team that was really supposed to be as bad as any team in the FBS this year. Timmy Chang, his first year, nobody coming back, no experience. They stood virtually no chance, but give them their credit. I don't know how they're doing it, but they're cashing tickets, as you mentioned here. And if you're cashing tickets with them, it's kind of hard to jump off that freight train. I'm not going to be on them because I haven't been. But I gotta tip the hat to Timmy Chang. He's done a pretty good job with the Rainbow Warriors.
By the way, Boise State in 2 weeks at Wyoming. Right now, that could be for the Mountain title. Because that's it. It's the only way any other team is going to win the Mountain except Boise is if Wyoming can hang in there and win that football game. And as I keep saying, I certainly hope it snows. So it's always fun. Oh, by the way, Air Force and Army are playing this week. So Air Force can win the trophy with a win over Army. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't like what's going on at Air Force this season, and our Army's starting to get their act together again. I'm going to take Army. It's a small upset. It's 230 on the money line. They've won 4-5 against Air Force. And also keep in mind the last 4 in this series have been decided by 7 points or less. So if you just want to take the 7, go ahead and do that as well. But I'm going to go for the whole shebang and take the money line in this matchup with Air Force.
Well, I'll take the points with Army in the football game. I won't be so brazen as to look for the win. Our Air Force has been up and down and largely down this year. When they looked like they were so good, suddenly they reverted back to the pack. And it's been a really close call series here, of which Army has dominated. If you say winning 4 of the last 5, that's pretty strong for a dog like this. I'm with you. Give me the points with the military dog.
In the Sun Belt, we move on to the Sun Belt. Big win for Coastal Carolina and my boy Grayson McCall last night as they beat Appalachian State. They now have the lead in the East. The West is still a battle between Troy, Southern Miss, and South Alabama. Southern Miss will host Georgia State. South Alabama will be at Georgia Southern. And maybe the best game will be Troy at Louisiana Lafayette. And in those games, I'm actually going to take Troy. 4, it's a little tricky, but I'll take Troy. And I'm also going to take Southern Miss. The Alabama-Georgia Southern game I'm staying away from.
The other game, the Troy-Louisiana game is an intriguing football game. We're seeing a metamorphosis, if you will, of the Raging Cajuns here. Billy Napier gone in this football program, not near where they used to be. But I'm giving their due. They're gutty. They're hanging in there. Troy comes in on this 5-game win streak. They've allowed less than 13 points a game in that win streak, so they're playing their best football of the season here. But I think it's being priced for accordingly, so put a gun to my head. I'd probably lean to the Raging Cajuns on their home field.
We move to the Conference USA, and it looks like it may be Texas San Antonio again in the championship game. I doubt that they won't be. The question will be who will join them. And after North Texas's big win last week over Western Kentucky, could be North Texas. If they can run the table, they have a huge game this week, big point spread over FIU, who's actually starting to play good football again, thanks to Mike McIntyre, who likes to rebuild programs. But that, as far as this conference is concerned, the big game is probably going to be really going to be the UTSA UAB game. UAB is 4-0 at home, 0-4 on the road. They happen to be at home this week, but I don't have to even give any points in this spot. And Texas San Antonio is definitely the better team, so that's why this is my best play in the Conference USA. And another game that I'm going to talk about in just a second.
Well, I'm a little bit concerned here. This is a bad spot for UTSA. Yes, you say they are the better football team coming into the game here, but this home road dichotomy for UAB is really strong. Looking at them at home on their home field, in which they've scored 28 or more points coming into this contest here, this season here, is really, really difficult for me to pass. And small lean to me to UAB, but if you're right, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, and then I tell you what, one more. Let's talk about the MAC, because the MAC is now turned. This is the time of season it turns into a Tuesday, Wednesday affair. And remember, I think because I've harped on it quite a bit on this show, you should have been watching our previews because our sleepers are kicking butt. And one of our sleepers was Bowling Green. And Bowling Green right now tied in the East with Buffalo and Ohio after Ohio beat Buffalo earlier, just a couple days ago. And Bowling Green was able to beat Western Michigan. In the West, Toledo has the lead, and I'm not so sure Toledo is going to relinquish that lead because they're the best team in the West.
Yeah, they are the best team in the West, and kudos to us on the Bowling Green call. They've improved so much, Greg, that they were actually steamed to the point where they were favored in the game, won the game, and didn't cash because of how high they were steamed in the game.
Okay.
So, they're catching somebody's attention, especially in Vegas. So, hats off to them there as well. I still think that this is Toledo's conference to lose.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it all plays out. But I got to make the Rockets in the driver's seat so far going home in the MAC conference.
By the way, those teams in the East, Buffalo is at Central Michigan on Wednesday. Ohio is at Miami of Ohio on Tuesday, and Bowling Green will host Kent State on Wednesday. Now, we want to close out with the double-digit plays, and one of them actually was in the conference we just talked about, Conference USA. Charlotte. See, here's the play. Here's interesting. Last week, Healy gets fired, and what does Charlotte do as a 17-point underdog to Rice? They win the game by like 40. So I'm going to go back to them because Western Kentucky had that blowout loss to North Texas. I wonder whether or not they're kind of punch drunk now. And whatever Charlotte did, maybe it continues because they're at home now. And they're a 5-1 money line play. Auburn is my other pick for the same reason because they just fired their coach. And now they're on the road against Mississippi State. And I've already been hearing, I interviewed Brian Matthews, who covers the Auburn Tigers. And we were talking, and he said, I'm not sure about this week, but I guarantee you next week when they play Texas A&M at home, that crowd is going to be raucous. Cadillac Williams is the interim coach. They love him. The place is going to go crazy. Watch out for Auburn next week against Texas A&M. But I'm going to go ahead and take that as, you know what, if they really are like this Cadillac Williams guy, then maybe I'll go ahead and maybe they could pull it off this week.
I'd call that a play press, Greg. You play them this week. If you don't win, you press it and come back and play them again.
That's it.
On the money line. Right.
Yeah, right.
You know, I think they have a chance to go 1-1 straight up in these two football games. And if they do, these big dogs that they're going to be, you're going to end up cashing tickets on them. Of your two, I'd probably go to Auburn here over Mississippi State, only because in the Charlotte game, we don't know what got Charlotte attention last week. But it could well have been they just did not want to play for Will Healy.
Possible.
And the fact he's gone, all of a sudden, they felt like, hey, we can breathe now. So we'll find out this week. If they're competitive against Western Kentucky, it's going to speak volumes for just that being the case.
And then closing out, we just want to wrap up with the NFL. A couple of things because we did not talk Week 9. I just wanted to mention that my top pick this week is going to be Minnesota. That's the reason I have their logo on the screen. You just have to be impressed by how things have turned around this year for this football team with a first-year coach and Kirk Cousins. Nice. Washington. Washington's things are going nice for Washington and Taylor Heineke. I get that. But they're not playing like a team with questions now. They're not playing like a bad team. They're not playing one of the hottest teams in football, and this is where I think the buck stops. And that's why I like Minnesota giving the 3 in that spot.
Well, you're in a near-win situation here, if you will, and you're going to ask Washington to play a little bit better than that. I can understand your rationale and your thinking. I like Minnesota in the game here as well. Taylor Heineke's really been a nice, pleasant surprise for them, and I love seeing it because I like watching him play a whole lot more than Carson Wentz. And I think it's Heineke's job to lose even when Wentz comes back. I think they're sort of fed up with him. And I think the only reason they'll go back to Wentz is if there is an injury that occurs along the way. Kirk Cousins is the quarterback here that's, I think, been a benefactor of the solid play by the Vikings and their new head coach here. I'm going to look at them in this win-like situation here. You've got a Washington team that's 500 and thinks they're good. Okay, we're going to find out if they're good or not. You'll find winning teams in situations like this that prove that they're the better team, and I think that's Minnesota, and I'm with you on the Vikings.
And then my only upset in the NFL this week is going to be the Colts. I'm taking the Colts. They're 2-1 on the money line. I know they lost last week in a spot that they probably shouldn't have, but it's second week for the quarterback. New England, I wasn't impressed by New England last week. New England won the football game against the Jets because the Jets gave the game away. The Jets have shown that they're just still too immature right now to beat teams that are well coached, like the Patriots. But I think the Colts, they're in a more desperate, dire situation. Patriots just lost to the Bears a couple of weeks ago. I'm not saying I know the Colts are going to win this game, but if I'm looking for an upset this week, and I'm talking about an upset in the NFL has to be at least like 4.5, 5 minimum on the point spread. You have to at least get around plus 180, 200. This was the best one for me.
I don't disagree. I mean, you've got a team in the Colts here that better offense, better defense. who's New England, to be favored like this against a team that owns the better stats in the football game? Uh, I'm a little bit concerned about Sam Ellinger being this. I'm not going to call him a rookie because he's been a backup here for quite a while. But for all intents and purposes, he is a rookie. He's a first-year starting quarterback, and Bill Belichick does tend to feast on those type of quarterbacks. Now he's got some game film on Ellinger that could end up being a factor in the game
Good point.
as well. But I'm going to take the points with the Colts with you in this game and make New England play a good football game.
Mark, appreciate it as always. You, of course, are very busy on your own channel at Playbook Experts, so that continues to run smoothly. There's still a lot of football left, as we said in the beginning of the show, and then it's on to college basketball and so forth. So what you got going on over at Playbook Sports and Playbook Experts?
Well, Playbook Experts, more and more of our experts are making videos. You can watch our free pick videos on the Playbook Experts YouTube channel. I have a complimentary college and a complimentary play both on tap for you this weekend. Check it out online, playbooksports.com, or go to the YouTube Playbook Experts channel.
Mark, appreciate it. And we'll be back next week to talk more in depth on the NFL as well as college football. We'll get back to that kind of a format. Thanks to everybody. We're still a few weeks away from the Thanksgiving holiday break. So before we get into that, we're going to talk a lot more big college football action and the NFL. We went over those schedules. We teased you about them. So things are looking really good there. It's an exciting time of year to be a football, college, and NFL fan. Don't forget, please, to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what you like to see here, and then also share it with your friends and so forth. We appreciate that. We'll see you again next week. For Marc Lawrence, from Greg DePalma, and have a good week, a profitable week. And don't forget to watch the Breeders' Cup, too.